Go ahead and call the meeting to order. Call the meeting to order at 4:03. This is a special meeting for Tuesday, September 12th at 4:03. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
I will. Tim Hale may be present a little later. Stephanie Nowers. Here. Dee McKee will not be at this meeting. Rob Yunt. Assemblymember Yunt, are you still on the phone? Well, Madam Mayor, he was at one point.
Okay.
Moki 2.
Here.
Dimitri Ponoff.
Over here.
Ron Bernier.
Here.
You do have quorum, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, ma'am. I move to add emergency resolution 23-095 as the second item of business.
Okay. Any discussion or objections to changing the agenda to add that resolution? Okay, hearing none. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing and hearing none, then the agenda has been approved as changed. And if you will all rise, please. And Mr. O'Leary from the railroad, if you'll lead us in the pledge, and the flag is over here to our right.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item on our agenda is audience participation, and anyone in the audience is welcome to address the assembly on any subject. And we do have a sign-up sheet. We'll go ahead and have those people come forth first, and then we will see if there's anybody else, and then I will check also for those that are online. So the first person that I have sign-up sheet is Jessica. Yeah, there you are. And you'll have to turn the mic on and then just leave it on after you leave, lady. Yeah, when it turns green, then there you go. And state your name and go ahead and
Okay.
give us your testimony.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jessica Wright. Thank you for letting me testify. I'm here to support completing Paul Mackenzie Rail Extension Project. As we all know, Port Anchorage has a lot of problems. It requires constant repairs. It has to be dredged. The repair cost is estimated $1 billion. So it makes sense that we should look for another port that we can depend on. Port Mackenzie is a wonderful deep water port, and it's only 2 miles from Port Anchorage on water. So far, we have already spent $180 million on this Port Mackenzie railroad project. We just need to spend another $150 million to finish this project. I think it can be easily achieved. Besides, we can't leave this project halfway done. We must finish this railroad project. Someone suggests that we should turn this railroad project into a road. I think that's a terrible idea. Turning a railroad into a road is like trading a diamond with an ordinary rock. The value of a railroad far exceeds a regular road. We can put 30 to 40 cargoes on the train, but we can only put 1 cargo on the truck. As a port, it's crucial to be on Alaska railroad system. With the railroad, we can ship goods to other parts of Alaska and maybe to Canada one day. We can also use this railroad system ship goods to Port Mackenzie. We shouldn't wait, and we shouldn't alter the original plan. There's a reason why this railroad construction was planned as a first place, because they saw the great potential of Port Mackenzie. With the railroad infrastructure, Port Mackenzie can be the gateway to Matthew, to Fairbanks and to rest of Alaska. Without this railroad, it can only be a small local port. For these reasons, we must finish this railroad project without delay. It has to be done. It has to be the top priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
Okay, yeah, I wanted to stand and also testify about the importance of the rail link to Port McKenzie.
Stephen, will you state your name for the
Oh,
record? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
No problem.
Stephen Wright. I'm also a candidate for state senate out here in the Valley for District N. Okay, so Port McKenzie, as stated on the Borough page, is ideally suited for handling bulk material and serving the local community and providing critical tidewater access to interior Alaska. One of the things I wanted to do was remind the Assembly that we have built a terminal at Port McKenzie, and Port McKenzie, I think will be one of the things other than commodities and competition. I feel it's something that needs to happen as far as tourism goes as well. You built a terminal, and if you don't complete the rail extension, how are you going to use that terminal? So that particular terminal would be great to facilitate tourism. The Matanuska Borough is the gateway to, not only the gateway to Denali, but it's the gateway to, well, it says on the building, if you go down and look at that building, it says that Port McKenzie is the gateway to the Matanuska Borough. So keep that in mind. It's a vital deepwater port. The project is more than halfway completed. It is part of Alaska's biggest deepwater port, and it's vital to our economy. It provides additional access that could be used for tourism, greatly cutting the distance to Denali, as well as it provides the needed competition with Anchorage. Anchorage Port has many problems, and it has to be updated all the time, whereas our deep draft port doesn't need the dredging and the other things that occur from time to time that add great significant costs. And we could be very competitive with the Port of Anchorage. We could actually be a better port than the Port of Alaska. So it's important that with the Anchorage port, we can reduce carrier costs and other things. It's Alaska's deepwater port. It's important for our future, like I said, for commodities, competition, tourism, and it's the gateway to our future. So we need this, and it's vital. We are a resource development state, and as such, as a resource development state, we need to have the infrastructure that's needed to help us build into the future. And I can't see a better port than Port McKenzie with a population expansion into interior Alaska. And it's, in fact, on your website, it mentions it's critical to interior Alaska. So this rail extension will help connect the Calgary, Alberta to Anchorage, which I call Alberta to Port McKenzie, because Anchorage's port is very limited in scope and in ability. And I know it's important. We can make Alaska great again by finishing and completing our rail extension. Thanks.
Thank you. Ron?
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Assembly members and staff. My name is Ron Johnson. I'm a resident of Borough District Number 1. It's pretty hard to follow up with Jessica and Stephen, but I'm here against turning the rail bed into a road. I believe that for the economic future of not only the Mat-Su Borough, but the state of Alaska, that rail extension to the port is going to be critical. You know, we took a risk when we built the port, and I don't think it's time now to back away from that risk. I still see for the future of Alaska and the Mat-Su, God has granted us resources. We're a resource state, and I think we all know that resources require heavy haul. And that to pull resources out of the interior, whether it's timber, mining, maybe coal will come back. It's going to take that rail extension to deliver that product to the port. I just think that it's short term, yeah, it makes sense to turn it into a road. We've had this port for several years and it's costing us money. But I think for the long-term future of the economic health of the Mat-Su Borough and the state of Alaska, that port is critical to our future. And I think we should march on. I'm going to be very interested to hear what the railroad's take on this is, but I fully support keeping that rail extension. You know, I read the Borough Commissioner report about 3 years ago, and I wish I had time to review that. But the bottom line on that report, they said that Port McKenzie was a viable port, but we had done a poor job of marketing. And I hope that the Port Commission has taken that report to heart and do some serious marketing, and let's get some use out of that port. We're competing with Anchorage. I know they're against it, but we have a much better opportunity to export resources out of Port McKenzie than they do. So I support keeping the rail in place. Thank you.
Thank you. CJ?
Hi, I'm CJ Cohn, speaking for myself. And I'm in agreement with everybody else that spoke so far. I believe that the money that has been put in place, we need to continue the project. If we turn it into a highway, we will never have a rail there. It won't happen because we won't get the federal funding. They'll look at us and say, we gave you the money, we helped you out, we did everything, and look where you're at. You have a highway now. I think it would be a step backwards rather than a step forward. Yes, it's going to be expensive, and yes, the opportunities are not there yet, but until they are put in place, the infrastructure's put in place, the opportunities don't have a place to go. So put the rail in, and let's see where we can go from there. I mean, Delta's doing agriculture, Nenana's now doing agriculture. Maybe we can have mills where even they could be run through trains. If you look at how the West was completed in the lower 48 and even through Canada, it took trains, it took rail to make things work. And if we don't have that infrastructure, then we're always going to be behind. That's just my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Andrew?
Good afternoon. I came here to say that I support what the Borough Assembly is doing with either we're going to build a railroad or we're going to build a road. One of the two is going to be completed. It's been 8 years that a railroad hasn't been built. Everybody is correct with the railroad being more economical. I transport logs 500 miles. If I could do it by the railroad, it would take 40 gallons of fuel. Yeah, I do it with trucks right now. It takes 125 gallons of fuel, but the railroad won't ship logs for us. They have depots where they could put cars off and we could load logs and transport them for that less fuel usage. It's the same circumstance that you folks are facing where we have a railroad bed that's built, but the railroad won't build the tracks. And if they aren't going to do that and they haven't done it in 8 years, it's time to move on. Like what you were, I believe that's what you're planning to do. So I just wanted to come and support it. And everybody is correct. Railroad would be better. If we're not going to get a railroad, though, build a road. So thank you.
And Andrew, would you state your name for the record?
Andrew
please?
Traxler. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Karen?
Hello, I'm Karen Crandall. I'm just coming as a concerned citizen that has been driving down to Port McKenzie probably up to 5 times just in the last couple months, just checking out the road system, just going down to Port McKenzie, looking at the whole layout of the land. It's vast and wide and actually well-maintained. The roads going down are, I would say, in excellent condition, and it's not congested at all. And the thing is that going on the roadbed, we checked that out. To me, it's remarkable how much work has gone into it, starting from Houston. There's so much gravel. It's very scenic. It's gorgeous. The whole area could be used definitely for tourism. And it's just a remarkable infrastructure. And I think we need to go forward. Economically, to me, it sounds like a road system would be the first step and then go into the railroad. But That's the only scary thing about working with the federal government when you start working with the railroad system. But hopefully that would be something that could turn around and get things going. But we just don't want it shut down. And I feel that all the industry that this state has to present, that port is remarkable. I mean, it's very huge. The water system is deep. It's only really a quarter of a mile from Anchorage. It's very easily accessed. But when I went into Anchorage the other day, I was amazed how they have to dredge just for one boat to come in. I mean, the whole place is like mayhem, just getting through there with the railroad and all the things. It's really a congested area. And I don't know. I feel that Anchorage is, I know that they don't want to see that port go down, but there's so much cost going into that. It would be better to present that money to the development as the state, a whole state, not just Anchorage only, but for the whole state of Alaska. So we have natural resources that need to be developed and transported. So many goods and tourism to think about too. So let's make it happen.
Thanks, Karen. Catherine? I think that Catherine, right? Is it Keith? You have Veith? Last name? Yeah.
I have no comment.
Oh, okay.
Not yet, thank you.
Okay, Kim Griffith? Kim? Is she? Okay, all righty. So that's all that we have on the sign-up sheet, but now we'll open it up to anybody else that's here that would like to testify on this subject or any other subject to the assembly. Okay, Caleb, do we have one person online? Okay, whoever's ever online, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Carissa Hoyman. And what is the borough doing to solicit more businesses? There is Sealand and other maritime companies that could be utilized, that could utilize the port. Utilizing what we have will bring in more money to the Matsu Borough, which will in turn help to pay for the railways. Anchorage is not wanting us to have this port operating because it would take away money from them. Obviously, they cannot handle their own port in a financially beneficial manner due to their inability to properly build docks, causing Anchorage to throw away many millions of taxpayer dollars. So let Port McKenzie benefit those of us living in the Matsu Borough. Let's capitalize on Anchorage's problem. Let's build that railway. Thank you.
Thank you. We have somebody else online. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Margaret Stern, and I'm calling on behalf of the Susitna River Coalition. We're a small grassroots nonprofit based up in Tuskegee, Alaska, and we have many concerns about pouring more money into this project and turning it into a road. We see its major connection to the West Susitna Industrial Corridor and are concerned about the many issues that come from the overlap of civilian and industry traffic that might occur. As we are learning from our neighbors to the north of Kinross and Manchot, the overlap of civilian and industry traffic sets the stage for dangerous, unsafe roads, and we would be concerned about that overlap. So thank you for listening and considering this issue.
Thank you. We have anybody else online? We do not. Okay, well, we'll bring it back here to the audience. Is there anyone else, anybody that hasn't testified that would like to? Okay. I see hand moving, but I don't see body motion, so, okay. I'm going to go ahead and close audience participation. The next item on our agenda is appoint McKenzie Rail Extension discussion, and I'll turn it over to the borough manager at this time. I believe he has a PowerPoint you can see up on the screens, And
Great. Thank you,
Go
Madam
ahead,
Mayor.
sir.
I'm going to move through this pretty quickly, but before we start, I want to say thank you to those in attendance. I know we have Senator Shower's office here, Chandra Erickson's here. We have Representative Kathy Tilton, Representative Jesse Sumner, Representative Kevin McCabe, and staff Angie Steffels here as well. Todd Smolden from the governor's office here out here in the Mat-Su. I see John Springsteen walked in the back from the office of the governor. And John, there's a seat up here next to Todd if you want to. Deputy Commissioner for the State Department of Transportation, Catherine Keith is here, so thank you. And then from the railroad, we have Bill O'Leary, the president and CEO, Brian Lindemood, Christy Terry, and Megan Clemens. I think I got all of you. And then we have a few of the borough staff members over here from Public Works and Port McKenzie that can participate in the conversation if needed. To be clear, the presentation I'm going to go through is a website. It's available to the public. We set it up that way intentionally so that folks can go to the link and interact with some of the mapping features that are available to help describe and explain some of the characteristics for both Port McKenzie and for the Port McKenzie Rail Extension Project. So that is available at matsugov.us/PMRE. That's on the agenda tonight and published on the website. So I would certainly encourage folks to take a look at that. I'm going to scroll through it as I'm talking. Obviously, you're not going to be able to see that from the audience, every aspect of it. So I'm just going to kind of give you an overview and put a little bit of narrative to it. My role today here is to incite a discussion. So I may ask questions or make statements you may disagree with. This is a discussion. There is no decision on the agenda today, just to be clear. So folks in the audience and those online know what we're doing here and why there's no vote or action that the Assembly will take today. So I'm gonna go through a quick project background. I'm gonna make a statement. I'm gonna make a short and simple argument for why we might convert this rail project to a road. And then you can consider the elements of those things. And then I'll walk through the project and provide some background and context. And then I think we'll turn it over to those that have joined us at the tables today to have a little bit more of a discussion. Last year, the Assembly added a state legislative priority to its list to explore the conversion of the rail project to a public road. More recently, the Assembly passed a resolution approving the manager to submit a federal grant application to construct a public road within segments 3, 4, and 5 on the rail project from Ayrshire Avenue in the Point McKenzie area to Miller's Reach Road in Houston. And I'll illustrate that here in a moment. There are essentially 3 options that we have discussed. Number 1, complete the rail project estimated at $200 million. Option 2, convert to a road estimated at $70 million. Or option 3, continue to do nothing. To be clear, the only option I'm opposed to is option 3, doing nothing. Based on the Assembly's most recent resolution, the borough has explored options for converting to a road, and I'll explain this decision by discussing the rationale behind it, primarily focusing on it, and I appreciate Mr. Johnson recognizing it, using this as kind of a conversation around risk. One effective way to evaluate risk is by considering both the likelihood of an event and its corresponding impact. Regarding the completion of the project, it's important to note that there has been no progress in approximately 8 years. The utilization of rail infrastructure carries a significant degree of uncertainty, particularly in terms of 1, securing the funding to complete the project, and 2, determining its eventual use. Nevertheless, if managed efficiently, the rail has the potential for substantial positive impacts. So, high degree of uncertainty on the likelihood side, a high degree of impact if it were managed effectively and used. Conversely, constructing a public road is well within the borough's capabilities, allowing for construction, maintenance, and the realization of public benefits. This option presents a higher likelihood of success in terms of completion and delivering public benefits. While a public road may not yield the same scale of positive impacts as a fully utilized rail system, it would still greatly support access and development. It is my belief the borough has explored option 2, converting to a road, due to its higher level of certainty regarding project completion and the realization of public benefits. This decision aligns with the goal of facilitating access and development, albeit potentially not on the same scale that a fully utilized rail system could offer. So I'm going to go through this briefly and give you a little bit of project background. It's probably not fair to assume that the public understands all the different components to what PMRE is, or even what exists at Port McKenzie today. So the Port McKenzie Rail Extension Project, there's tabs here along the top. Again, this is publicly available. I'm only going to talk about the project background, a little bit about Port McKenzie, the transportation corridor, other considerations. I am not going to touch on land ownership or virtual tour, but those are available for the public if you want to dive in. The Port McKenzie Rail Extension Project is designed to open a 32-mile rail corridor from Port McKenzie to the rail main line in Houston. The project has received $184 million in state legislative grant and bond funding, with the last funding received in fiscal year 2015. The project began in 2006 with an environmental impact study completed in March 2011. The project is broken into 6 segments and has remained idle for several years. The placement of rails, ties, ballast, and signals has yet to be completed, with the exception of segment 6. So as I scroll down here and click on segment 6, it will zoom in. Segment 6 is also known as the Y. It is the only complete segment effectively used by the Railroad Corporation, and that segment is located in Houston and connects to the rail main line. Segments 3, 4, and 5. There we go. Segments 3, 4, and 5 are proposed for conversion from rail to an 18-mile road. The constructed embankment provides a 40-foot road top with one end connecting to Miller's Reach Road in Houston and the other to Ayrshire Avenue in the Point McKenzie area. These segments have 6 rail bridge crossings and a number of intersections requiring upgrades. Segment 2 extends from Ayrshire Avenue for 7.1 miles through the Point McKenzie Agricultural District. The right-of-way has been purchased. However, the embankment still needs to be constructed. Segment 1 extends 4.7 miles into the Port McKenzie district and terminates at a proposed rail loop. The embankment and one bridge have been constructed along this segment. So that's a quick overview of the Point McKenzie Rail Extension Project. I'm going to do a quick highlight of Port McKenzie quickly, and then I'll move on. Port McKenzie, constructed as a bulk commodity export facility with a deep draft dock, barge dock, and bow ramp, sets within the 9,000-acre port district with 14 square miles of usable land for development. The port's location makes both deep water and shallow water docking berths possible. It provides flexibility to handle a variety of vessels, including some of the largest bulk vessels currently in service and calling on ports around the world. The port also can take bulk commodity ships at the deep draft dock and ocean-going and river barges at the shallower barge dock. And for more information, we also have a website for Port McKenzie. That's portmckenzie.matsu.gov.us. So that's also publicly available as well. There is a conveyor currently at the port. The conveyor runs from an uplands lease lot across the dock and trestle to the deep draft dock, and that's what's depicted in dashed yellow lines on this graphic. A proposed row ramp or roll-on, roll-off ramp would create a sloped haul-out ramp for barges and other watercraft. The ramp would allow barges to be grounded and pulled onto the uplands for storage. Vessels would come into the ramp on a rising tide and would be placed on cylindrical airbags. Vessels would be pulled by heavy equipment and rolled into the uplands on the airbags. The ramp may have future uses, including the offloading of cargo, launching and hauling by hydraulic trailer, and other specialized operations. The borough will consider funding options for a row ramp next month. The deep water dock is 1,200 feet long with a depth of 60 feet at mean low water. The borough was awarded a $7.6 million federal grant in August of 2021 from the Economic Development Administration to install pile sleeves on the existing deep draft dock, and that project's moving forward. A bow ramp, I'll back up to the pic there so you can see that. A bow ramp capable of loading and offloading barges and landing craft is available adjacent to the south wing wall of the barge dock. And then there is the barge dock itself. The port supports 14.7 acre gravel surface barge dock with a 500-foot bulkhead. So that gives you a quick overview. And again, folks can scroll through that, get the same narrative I just described, and see these points illustrated on aerial imagery. Now, as far as the transportation corridor goes, I'm going to highlight a couple of components of that. The 18-mile segment being considered for conversion to a road would create more direct access to the Parks Highway from the Point McKenzie area. Additionally, the corridor would provide access to lands along the corridor for development. The 18-mile corridor already has a 40-foot embankment constructed that I mentioned earlier. The proposal to upgrade to a road would include paving the road. The borough applied for a federal rural grant in August 2023 for funding to complete this road project. The grant application was accompanied by a letter of support from the State Department of Transportation. The proposed route begins in Houston, leaving from Miller's Reach Road. The first 3 miles of the road are actually within the city of Houston limits. The proposed segment, as I mentioned earlier, has 6 rail bridges and a number of road at-grade intersections requiring upgrades to support vehicular traffic. On the southern end, it terminates at the West Ayrshire Avenue, an existing public road. The location is also the terminus for the proposed West Susitna access road. Ayrshire Avenue connects to Point McKenzie Road, which connects to the east to Connect Goose Bay Road, and to the south to Point McKenzie Road, which is actually how you would get to the port if you were following a public road system. The only other considerations I'm going to mention, and I won't go into these in detail, but they are listed here for folks to take a look at, is there are a number of state and borough transportation projects occurring in the Point McKenzie area that generally have a confluence in and around the Ayrshire Avenue area. Those improvements include upgrades to the Connect Goose Bay corridor going to a divided 4-lane. The borough and the state are both looking at Point McKenzie road improvements. The borough has some projects going on there currently. We've got the Port McKenzie Rail Extension Project, which is obviously a transportation corridor. We have the West Susitna Access Road that the state is considering including in the STIP. And you still have the Connect Arm Crossing somewhere listed as a project that funding has been put into to permit, acquire right of way, and ultimately, in theory, construct someday. These projects, if coordinated, have the potential to improve resiliency and safety, provide better access to interior Alaska, and foster development in the Point McKenzie area to include Port McKenzie. So that's the background I'd offer the group tonight. Again, we're going to ask some questions, and I guess I'll turn it back to the mayor, and she will see where we want to start this conversation, because I know there has been concerns about converting rail to road. This kind of provides you some background and context on the project, and in the end, it's I think time to realize some public benefits for a project that started in 2006. That's all I have, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Comments? Who wants to start first? Representative McCabe, you got the biggest grin on your face. Jesse looks pretty somber.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mhm.
I am in the same boat, I think, as Mr. Brown. It just needs to be done one way or the other. I will tell you, however, that Alaska is a resource state, and part of resource is resource transportation. If we convert this to a road, you will be converting it to the death of Port McKenzie. You will not be able to supply enough ships with trucks on that road for Port McKenzie to survive. 70% of the freight that enters Long Beach Port comes or goes by rail, 70%. I can't find, and I'm still looking, but I can't find any major seaport in the United States that is not connected by a railroad. I'm sorry. It's just, we are not going to, we're 500 truck drivers short in the state right now. We are not going to be able to drive enough trucks on the Port McKenzie rail extension to support a port the size that we desire for Port McKenzie, or to support this state, or to support the security for this state. So turning this into a road, you can almost guarantee it will be the death of Port McKenzie. So in my opinion, a railroad is possibly a better alternative, but we have an issue with risk averse or timidness halfway into a project. So there are many people that are interested in Port McKenzie, but they don't want to express their interest because of investors or whatever, but they're not sure that the railroad is going to matriculate, is going to come up and finish the project. So there's a bunch of players waiting in the wings that are really unwilling to commit publicly to anything in Port McKenzie until the railroad and the Matsu Borough commit publicly to finishing this thing. $200 million from everybody that I have talked to is a very high price. Is probably not, considering that we've already put $187 million into the rail bed, a realistic price. I think it's closer to $150 million based on the amount of money per mile for track laying that everybody else pays. And I think we should get a second opinion rather than just rely on the opinion from the Alaska Railroad on how much it's going to cost. Maybe there's a better contractor out there that can build the rail cheaper. I also talked to the Federal Railroad Administration, and they think, or the person I talked to thought, that the $187 million we have already spent on Port McKenzie Rail Extension Railbed could be considered the federal match. The Biden administration is very interested in rail. It is seen as a more green or more fuel efficient operation. You can haul more pounds of good per unit of fuel used, more pounds of goods or more pounds of minerals, resources, whatever it is, than you can on a truck. So they see it as less pollution, if you will, less carbon into the atmosphere. For whatever reason, the Biden administration loves rail. They're going to double the size of Amtrak in the lower 48 in the next 5 years. I think if we are going to finish a rail extension, now is the time. But we have to be willing to act. We have to be willing to take the risk to step into this program, apply for the federal funding, see if we can get the Federal Railroad Administration on board, see if we can get the Alaska Railroad on board, and go together as partners to finish this. 44% of the Alaska Railroad in 2022 was freight. Could it be more? I think it could be more. If we had the port to deliver to, ports make their money from land. You've probably heard me say that before. Anchorage has got about 400 acres. We have 14.5 square miles. You're not going to be able to haul a bunch of minerals into the port of Anchorage and store them anywhere, waiting to load them on a ship for a week or 10 days or however long it takes. You will be able to do that in Port McKenzie because we have the land. We have the land to build more fuel tanks. If there is a fuel person out there that wants, or a fuel supplier out there that wants to build his own tanks instead of relying on the Petrostar or the Marathon tanks in the Port of Alaska. So a 7 million gallon tank takes up some real estate, and there's no place in the Port of Alaska for them to do that. We have the land to develop a cement plant. We have the land to store salt, as we have already proven this summer. And I think that it is less risky to complete the railroad for the state of Alaska and for our security concerns for the United States, frankly. If you think about it, right now, you've heard me say this before as well, we can only deliver bullets and bombs for the Fairbanks military bases through Valdez, through the Port of Valdez. I think it would be very easy to bring them into Port McKenzie and send them directly up the rail instead of through all the roads from Valdez up to Fairbanks. Currently, there is a requirement for the military to be able to load out from their training area up by Fort Greely within 72 hours. Using the state roads right now, that would be virtually impossible. Using the railroad, they could absolutely do that. So there are a number of security aspects that we need to explore with the federal government as well if we're going to do this port. So right now, I think we're at a nexus point for the Matsu Borough. And I think that we need to be brave enough and have enough foresight to take this port forward. And I think that absolutely, if we build it, they will come, and we will be able to use this port to further the resource development that we know is north of us. I might have more later.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to address or?
If
Yeah.
I may,
Sure.
I mean, because, that's my role tonight, so I'll say some things that get uncomfortable. I would express some concern. So the primary concern I have from a management perspective with Port McKenzie, we're on a clock. We're over 20 years old, and a lot of the dock facilities were constructed with a 25-year usable life. And the reality is those are local taxpayer problems. And so that's my concern about time. So I do agree with you absolutely on this sense of urgency. But the challenge is, what if we keep coming to the state legislature, and what if the funding through grant, whether it's grants or bonds, doesn't really matter to me personally. I mean, I have some thoughts about that personally, but we'll just say state legislative funding. If those things don't come, all we're going to do is continue to be going down the road that we've been going down now for many years. And I think that's the concern, is how do we force the issue so that we get a decision, and regardless of the decision, there is action. Because in the end, as we have cells along the bulkhead, along the barge dock that start to fail, we're going to have to replace those facilities. And I suspect the first place it'll be on local taxpayers. So there is a sense of urgency here, and I absolutely agree with that. And that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish tonight, is figure out what that answer is going to be and move forward in a direction, ideally in unity. But, one of the comments I heard too is, the railroad's estimate. The $200 million is an estimate we got from the Alaska Railroad Corporation. The borough doesn't build railroads, so we can tell you what it would cost us to build a road, but I'm probably not the expert to consult on what we think the cost would be to complete the railroad. So I think we're going to continue to leverage that, because in the end, we have to build a facility that the railroad will accept to operate and maintain. And right now, that 18 miles, actually the whole 32-mile corridor, the borough still owns that right away. And again, a project that started in 2006, we're still talking about it in 2023, and we don't have any funding on the books to advance this project past its current state. And to be clear, I don't think the borough's intent is to allocate local taxpayer funds to this project. So if that's the case, it's either going to come through a federal grant, which will likely require a non-federal match, let's say, or it comes through state appropriated funding. And I think that's where we're kind of stuck, because I'm sitting here in a position where I have to answer to these folks about maintenance costs, deferred maintenance, and how we advance things with the port. But we got these projects like this one that are hanging out there and have been hanging out there for years with no progress. I'll be quiet now.
Okay. Maybe we should hear from the railroad. Did you bring your check?
Senator Shower, I'd like to question as well when I get a chance. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did Senator Shower said what?
Yeah, after the railroad, Mayor, I have a question as well, or a comment with the manager. So when I get a chance in the queue, if you'd let me know, thank you.
Okay. It's the railroad said you can go if you want to do it now, or do you want to wait to hear what the railroad says, sir?
I'll go after. Thank you.
Okay. All righty. Go ahead, sir.
Well, good afternoon, first of all, and thank you for having us here today. My name is Bill O'Leary. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Alaska Railroad, and as Borough Manager Brown said, we traveled in a pack out here today to some degree. We've got 4 of us here. We've got immediately to my right is Megan Clemens, our Director of External Affairs. We have to her right is Brian Lindemood, our Chief Engineer for the railroad and Vice President of Engineering. And to Brian's right is Christy Terry, our Vice President of Real Estate. So hopefully we have the group here to be able to answer any questions that come up here. Certainly don't have any kind of prepared remarks or presentation on this. I do want to just kind of start a little bit off though and say that going back in history here, the genesis of this as we were involved was back in the 2007 time frame, and it was to put a rail extension to Port Mackenzie, and as I understood it, in support of a project down on the Kenai Peninsula, actually. It's going to be shipping products through the port by rail and then barging it down to the project on the Kenai. And I think it kind of grew from that particular point. And, I think the railroad has a, demonstrated history of being very much in support of this project. But to be very clear, it is, from our perspective, a Matsu Borough project. And it's something that the railroad has acted as the program manager, or effectively the contractor, because, we understand we build rail. This is what we do. There was, I don't think any formal agreement between the Matsu Borough and the railroad. There was more of a handshake or agreement that upon completion, this portion of the railroad would transfer to the Alaska Railroad. But again, I think that was all to be subject to, well, let's get to the completion of this and we see where it goes. So it's something that, over the years, as we have put significant effort into the actual construction and all of the other ancillary work that goes along with that, the environmental work, the land work that had to be done. When the funding stopped in the 2015 timeframe, we still continued to work with the borough, being part of a grant application that the borough put in support of a project along with the Fairbanks North Star Borough and the interior gas utility in Fairbanks. We worked extensively for over 5 years with the group, the Alaska to Alberta group, the A2A group, that was looking to connect the Alaska Railroad with the Canadian system, provide a land-based connection for the rail. And, a key portion of that would have involved the Port Mackenzie rail extension, part of that. We've also worked significantly with other groups that have come, again, mostly around LNG, truthfully, that wanted to put processing plants in the area and, access items from the using the rail. So it is something that we're supportive of. It's something, to be real clear, we like infrastructure. We think infrastructure is a really, really good thing. And we think it's, to a large degree, what's holding this state back from its real potential in a lot of ways. And we think it's something that we're very, very, again, supportive of. That said, the Alaska Railroad is not an entity that certainly on its own can just come in, aside from the fact that this is not our project, but it's not something that can just has the balance sheet to be able to deal with something like, whatever the dollar amounts are. And to the point about the dollar amounts here, when construction ceased, or when activities ceased in the 2015, 2016, again, as I understand it, it was, this was identified as somewhere around a $315 to $325 million project all in. And so, again, walking around numbers here, it was somewhere short of $130 to $140 million. We have not done any hard re-estimation on this since that point. So all we have done when we've been asked as to what we think this may cost is just taking a look at what construction costs have done in the intervening period and inflated up there, saying with always the, excuse me, the caveat that if there's, if this thing goes somewhere in earnest, that, a hard estimation would have to be done, or a re-estimation would have to be done as to what it would cost to actually complete this, this project. So, again, I don't think it's still probably $135 million. Is it $200 million? I couldn't tell you at this particular point out there. I'm not sure I've got a whole lot, really else to say at this particular point, other than, the railroad has been supportive of this project. We continue to be supportive of this project. We think rail is a very, very good thing. We think to the points that Representative McCabe made, to many others speakers here today, it is something that rail is tremendously efficient for the type, for a certain model, for something that is looking to move significant quantities of a product. I mean, onesie twosie stuff, rail is not your answer on something like this. And what we call unit trains, which are long trains carrying usually one product in anywhere from 50 to 100 cars of that product, is where rail shines. It's tremendously cost effective. It's tremendously safe. It's really makes far and away the most sense. So again, if there is something that if there is a customer out there that wants to do something like that makes sense to use rail economically, we have certainly spoken with different groups in the past about that. As they've brought ideas up like that, there have not been, to the best of my knowledge, substantive discussions about that in recent years here. And just from the perspective also, just a little bit about the Alaska Railroad. It's it's an interesting organization in that it's owned fully by the state of Alaska, but it is different than any other entity that in the state, to the best of our knowledge, in that it is charged with being, in our statute, quote unquote, self-sustaining. And by that, basically, it means we have to pay our own way. Now, yes, we do receive, federal monies as a result of us running year-round scheduled passenger service. We are eligible for going after competitive grants out there. But the bottom line on it is, we kind of break our capital program, and a railroad lives and dies by its capital program, into kind of two components. The first is just what we need to do to not only kind of keep the wheels on the wagon, as I call it, keep our existing system in safe, efficient operating order, but also, to basically increase our efficiency, improve ourselves. But then we also look at items for economic development. Part of our statute also requires us to be an agent for economic development. And sometimes those two things are in conflict, where you've got this self-sustaining mandate and this economic development mandate out there. We can't our balance sheet, quite honestly, will not be able to handle many of the large economic development projects that are out there. So that's where, we are delighted to partner with the borough in going forward and looking at grants or other sources, whether it be it Juno, be it the federal government out there. But it's not something that say we would go bond for. Nobody would lend us the money anyway, but nobody go bond for, call it $150 million to complete this, absent a revenue source shown out there. So as is often the case with me, took way longer than I thought I was going to at this point, but that concludes my initial remarks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Senator Shower, go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor. Thank you. I apologize for not being there in person. As you know, I have a second job as a citizen legislator and find myself currently out of town, unable to be there in person, but I've been able to dial in and listen in. Some good comments. I have a question here momentarily for Mike Brown, if he could maybe just talk about it. I haven't heard it mentioned yet. I imagine what the answer would be, but I would like it to get out on the record. The comments I have for this are mostly in agreement, for example, with Representative McCabe. At this point, we've done this for 15, 16, 17 years and spent money on it. We either need to turn left or turn right, but we need to make a decision and do something. This will be relative to my question for the borough manager. However, we need to do something. The crux of economic growth is investment and continuing to grow your private sector economy. The government, doesn't really fund that. It's funded from the private sector. West Susitna access, drilling for oil and gas, mining for resources, logging for milling, et cetera, and export, you name it. We are a resource state. And so between the federal government and the state, we obviously need to do this. The railroad could probably comment on this. I remember a few years ago, we had a refinery in North Pole. I believe we shipped somewhere around 800 million gallons a year of jet fuel to Anchorage at the peak. And so we need to be building and doing things. I don't think there's anybody there that disagrees with that. My question comes down to a couple critical things. Without A2A, what is our backup plan? That's kind of the military side, right? Of being prepared, the big earthquake. If the port of Anchorage is taken out, may or may not take out the port of McKenzie. It could, but they certainly sustained the east side, sustained more damage than we did, and the epicenter was under the west side, over there down KGB of the last earthquake we had. So, if the bridges go out, the port's out, what do? That's where most of our goods comes from. We don't have a backup with A2A. We have nothing through Canada. So that's issue number one. It is always good to have backups, even with Kabata. We've spent a lot of money. We've not turned the first shovel of dirt, but we certainly need backup options for a bridge would be good in that sense, just from the pure point of having backup options for bringing resources into the state, because that's how we all survive. The second part of that is the roll-on, roll-off capability. I know that's significant, but you have the military, as Representative McCabe mentioned, is a fan of this. As you can well aware, I have a lot of friends still active duty, and that is something that they would greatly appreciate, having the ability to move resources and not having to do what they're currently having to do or to be on the hook for it. The federal government does have the potential to help us with some of that if we decide to go down that path. And I've talked about you, Mayor, and to Mayor Bronson about that, and the military. So that is an option we should, I think, at least pursue, in addition to the rest of it. All of that said, those are my comments, but I think those are things we can't forget about. We need economic development, and part of that's going to involve rail, as Representative McCabe said, and he's not wrong. You can't put enough trucks on that to do what rail can do if you're really talking about large, as the railroad representative just said, amounts of material. That has to go via rail. You simply don't have enough trucks to do it, to make it worthwhile for the size of a ship and what it would carry. So if we go down the path of continuing to put money, whether we build the bridge or it's just the port, my question for the borough, my question specifically for Mike, as you chew on this, is there an option to do both? In other words, I have asked a few people, and can it be made big enough, wide enough, or in the future, depending on funding sources as this moves along, is there an option to do both with a road and a rail? I know there are issues, and that's why I'd like him to comment on it, so that we could do one or the other. Or if you take the path now as the borough towards road, will we be able to come back if we secure funding later and put the railroad in if we are able to find the business models? Because building it and then saying they'll come, that's a tough one, right? Because you don't know for sure. But there are other reasons to build something beyond just, the business model. Like I said, backups, military use, et cetera, national security. So, Mike, can we do both? If we do one or the other, does that take out the option for the other later based on cost? I just want to know some other things that we should be considering as you decide which path you're going to go down and what that may limit us to do in the future based on economic growth, because we don't know where we're going to be 10 or 20 years down the road. Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Through the mayor to Senator Shaw, thanks for the question. And that is a concern of mine. If we build a road, that you may lose the prospect for rail. The reality is permitting's not getting easier. Construction costs are not going down. So there is a pretty good likelihood, in my opinion, that if we build the road, you may not get a rail. Now, in theory, you have enough funding, we can go do updated environmental impact study. You can go and acquire additional right of way. You can go through the permitting process to expand the corridor, but you have private and public ownership throughout that corridor. So it took several years to develop it to a point where you could even start to construct embankment throughout the corridor as it is today. So I think I can't answer that definitively, but I do think that there should be concerns about doing both in the future. I mean, that's just in full disclosure. As far as your comments about backups and resiliency, I totally agree that we should be looking at creating resiliency in our transportation infrastructure. And that's exactly what I'm just going to kind of be blunt, and I'm not trying to offend anyone. I think that's exactly what the state should be doing, right? The borough, it isn't our place, I don't think, to look at A2A and say it's in the state's best interest to have a connection to Canada, to Tidewater, or some of these other projects that extend beyond the borough's boundaries, because our focus is on providing services to our residents. And that's part of the frustration, frankly, for me, is when I look at these other considerations and I see millions of dollars being invested in transportation infrastructure, and I think I could make an argument that it's not being well coordinated. And that if we were to do that differently or perhaps better, we might generate a better outcome. And I mean, and I came into this job and I was like, I got to be careful when I say on public record. I'll just say the ferry. We don't use that word around here, right? Because it's not very popular. I think this project is the makings of another project like that, where we invest millions of dollars, yet we're not realizing any benefit. I mean, Mr. Wright showed the picture of the terminal building. That's why we have a terminal building. So I'm just trying to avoid that and going, let's get something done that actually enhances that. And whether it's a rail or a road, we're good. But I think that based on the past, this rail project has been 100% funded by the state, by state legislative appropriations. And unless we think there's a pretty good likelihood of that coming in the near future, certainly we can go and apply for federal grants, but there would still be a state connection because there's going to be a non-federal match component. All I'm saying is I don't think the borough's stepping up and going, we will provide that non-federal match. And I think, to be completely honest, that also applies to the federal grant for converting it to a road, right? Because there's a non-federal component. So I mean, all cards on the table, that's what we're looking at. And all we're trying to do is say, let's move this thing forward in one way, shape, or form. Yeah. And then the other piece I would ask the railroad, I'd ask Mr. O'Leary, let's do an updated estimate. You guys do a hard estimate instead of us speculating that it's somewhere between $150 and $200 million. So I would ask if you would be willing to take that on. Obviously, we aren't in the business of directing you all to do anything, but that would be a request from the borough. And as far as the roll-on, roll-off capability, we're already working that. So when I look at Port McKenzie, not the rail, we're already actively working on the pile sleeve protection for the deep draft dock. We're looking at options to develop a ro-ro capability, and we're actively out there trying to drum up business in terms of business development. That's what I think makes sense for the borough. Completing, and I know I don't disagree with you, Bill, when you said that this is a borough project. I think that's fair, but I also recognize that 100% of the funding has come from the state. So it seems like it's not just a borough project, because if that were the case, I would write myself a $200 million or $150 million check, and we would just go get the project done. So obviously it's a little more complicated with that than just that.
Mm-hmm. Let me just see if I
Mayor,
can.
Senator Showard, very briefly, adding to the railroad, if they could add to what Mike just asked them to look at with an updated estimate, I would also like to know if they have been in discussions with the federal government, specifically DOD, on how DOD may be able to help and or use the port based on the capability. If they haven't, I would request they do. I would help facilitate that if they would like. And if they have been in discussions, and if they have any feedback, I'd like to hear it. Not at this time for the timing of tonight, but I would just like to know that as well. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Senator McCabe wanted to speak, but let me see if Speaker of the House wanted to say something, or Representative Sumner wanted to say something, and then I don't know if Department of Transportation has some input or something. So, okay, go ahead, Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and all the assembly members who are here, and the rest of the folks who are taking their time out this afternoon to talk about this important project. I am not going to add a whole lot more than Representative McCabe. This does lie in his district and his area, although I do know that it does fall within the state, and the funding has been state funding. My big concern for our state is infrastructure, whether it be a road, whether it be a rail. The infrastructure is hugely important to our state at this point in time, and especially for the economic, we'll let that go, for the economic development that we want to bring to our state so that we can continue to be a thriving state. We want to build infrastructure that's going to encourage growth And so I do have some of the same questions as some of the folks have already previously asked, as far as resiliency here in the Matsu Borough and our entire state. And then just looking at how do we balance all of our infrastructure so that we are doing it for the best benefit of the state of Alaska? And of course, each one of you are going to be concerned about being assembly members of your area and your taxpayers. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, Representative Sumner, comments, sir?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I guess I would just be here to listen to the Assembly and the Mayor. Brent crude's at 92 something a barrel today. ANS is probably going to be 95 or whatnot. I haven't looked on a $73 a barrel budget. So I would ask what the Assembly and the Mayor think is the most important infrastructure project in the borough.
Okay, all right. I want to ask the railroad one question first. So on the, for your economic development, do you have a plan, say like 5 years, 10 years or something like that? And on that plan, has there been this railroad spur? Or has it just sort of been sitting there idle and your emphasis has been on other places?
Madam Mayor, the latter. It has not been.
Okay.
We do produce a 5-year capital plan, and that really is kind of driven by our strategic plan, driven by our goals, all of that kind of good stuff. But for the most part, this has not, or that is not seated in our 5-year plan at this point.
Okay, thank you. And then on the follow-up was what the borough manager had asked you regarding updating the estimates. Would that include what tariff you would have to charge also, for any hauling that you would do? Or would that just be on the construction to complete the project?
That would just be on the construction to complete the project.
Okay, okay. And how much more complicated would it make it be to get some tariffs on there? So, when we were talking then to people, okay, if it's built, this is what the railroad's going to charge you. So what's going to work out best? Because in our discussions with the people in the West Susitna is because they're going to be using, trucks, and they're from three people that we've talked to, the three companies that are actively out there right now that could maybe have product, are saying, they're not going to take it off the trucks and put it on the rail. They want to continue to have it on the trucks. So that's, just some of my comments. Thank you. Okay, well, let me, which way on the Assembly? Somebody on the Assembly who want to jump in, since nobody has, I gave all of the representatives an opportunity to sign a check and get this meeting over with, but I didn't hear of any of the four that testified. I didn't hear any of them say, oh, well, that's the first bill I'm going to introduce in January, is the fact that we're going to give let's just call it 200 million. That way then we can have a little bit extra to do. Buy cars, I don't know, do you need to buy some cars to put on the track and things like that? So we just as well go high and be done with it. Okay, anyway, Assembly, yes, Assembly Person Nowers, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to answer Representative Sumner. The most important infrastructure I'd say right now is fix Bogard. People are actually getting hurt and dying on there. So some of our roads in the core area, Glen Highway is getting done this year, but that was so delayed that we had another unfortunate accident that resulted in a fatality for a young man. So, that money's already gone, but there's some real infrastructure needs in the core area. One benefit of turning this into road, it takes some of the heavy traffic potentially off KGB. If we're running heavy loads, it would be a corridor for that. And then just kind of back to the bigger picture, you look like a genius if you invest right and the market follows you. but you look like a turnip if you put a bunch of money down and then it doesn't come through. And I think the state has examples of turnips where we put a lot of money down. So what I struggle with is something the mayor articulated, what's best for our residents, and the risk factor of putting another 150 or 200 million into a rail project and then having an asset that just sits there that needs to be maintained and run people off of. It's very deeply frustrating to have a $184 million project that's sitting there and it just has to be maintained, and then literally we're running people off there. So I really appreciate the comments one way or the other to move forward, and I think the balance of the benefits is there. The rail, as articulated, you could benefit to the nth degree, but is the market going to follow that? And that's what I really worry about. So to a certain extent, we're amortizing risk. We're trying to decide. And if we had a private partner sitting in the wings that said, we want to use the rail tomorrow, that might change the equation. So I guess that would be one of my questions back, if we've got somebody who, is a pretty nothing's a guarantee, but if we had some private entities that said they wanted to see this happen. Anyways, those are just some thoughts of the balances I'm trying to weigh up here as an assembly person.
Any other assembly comments? Representative, yeah, go ahead. And
Yeah,
then
so,
Representative McCabe, I'll come back to you.
Through the mayor to Mr. Sumner, fair point. We are in the process, or will be in the process, of putting a resolution together for the Assembly state and federal legislative priorities. That happens typically in October. So we will be looking to set up our annual meeting with the legislative delegation, the Valley delegation, probably in the December timeframe. So we'll be certain to clearly articulate those priorities and in a more clear fashion. You having served on the Assembly, you understand how that process works. So we will work on that and make that very clear in the resolution that we bring forward to the Assembly. And when they consider that, they can move that around so that that's clearly documented.
Okay. Representative McCabe, I'm going to recognize you in a minute. And I'd like to wrap this up because we do have the disasters. And again, this is your area. We've had some flooding up in Talkeetna area, and we need to do a resolution for declaring a disaster in that area. And then we also have a meeting at 6 with the school board. So I'd like to wrap this up by 5:30. So, but go ahead, Representative McCabe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'll be quick, and I guess through the mayor to Assembly or Mr. Brown. The $187 million, $184 million, I guess it is, that we have already spent is not federal money. When I told the Federal Railroad Administration person that I talked to, when I told him that, he said it could be used as the match. So that's the first thing. We haven't explored it further. I've mentioned it to Mr. Brown before, but it's not really, at this point, the players that know it that need to deal with it know it. And whether it be the railroad or the Matsu could approach the Federal Railroad Administration and solidify that if there was interest. Second, if we are going to do one or the other, then why don't we finish the 7.1 miles in phase 3 and then see what happens? I keep hearing, well, it might be a road. Well, okay, so it might be a road, but if it's going to be a railroad or a road, regardless, you have to finish the road bed. And I think it's phase 3, right? For 7 or phase 2. Okay, so it's still 7 miles worth of road bed that needs to be done, whether it be railroad bed or road bed. We could absolutely start on that if that's the direction we're going to go, and then worry about whether or not we're going to do a railroad or a road specifically after that gets done. So the borough is not really showing any interest in doing either one because there's no plans right now, and I'll be really blunt, to do that. So if you're serious about a road or if you're serious about a railroad, the rights of way are done. Let's finish that. The borough could do that. That would cut down on our cost with the railroad. Third thing is, I think we have paid, whether it be the borough or the state, the railroad or the Alaska Railroad, $20 million in consulting fees. And I'm not sure where that went, how that went. I know Mr. O'Leary says they're just contractors, but what did we really get for the $20 million worth of consulting fees that the borough, I think through the borough, that went to the railroad? So I think we need to explore that a little bit and see if there's maybe some leftover funds there that would help him or help the railroad find a way to give you the estimate that you need. So I think there's lots of discussion to be had on the railroad still. And I appreciate you holding this meeting. And as the speaker said, this is 100% in my district, both the port and the rail. And I'm intensely interested in seeing it completed one way or the other. Thanks.
Representative McCabe, I know you have attended some meetings where it sounds like there is some money out there. Do you know, in applying for that, would it have to come from the borough, or would it have to come from the railroad? And then would there, in applying for those grants, would there have to be pro forma financial statements that would need to be included to be sure that there was product in traffic that would verify that? Or did you get that far in looking at some of the grants?
I suspect that it has to come from the railroad. I
Okay.
don't think that the borough is not, the borough doesn't own a railroad, the state does. So
Mhm.
I think with the railroad, they would have to apply for the grants from the Federal Railroad Administration. Let's be honest, this all kind of happened when Flint Hills shut down and the price of coal tanked worldwide, and we got scared. The state got scared, the legislature got scared, the borough decided it wasn't a great idea, and the railroad backed out. Totally don't blame them. Flint Hills was a big hit to them. But the fact that we got scared shouldn't mean that we stop an infrastructure project that we've already put $184 million into that could be benefiting us right now as the price of coal and the need for coal in our Indo-Pacific allies rises. You know, and we need to start looking at natural gas as well. You know, how are we going to do all that? I think, maybe Mr. O'Leary can correct me, but I think the Alaska Railroad has an exemption for hauling natural gas, even though President Biden just shut down natural gas and rail in the lower 48. Could be wrong on that. Somebody mentioned that to me. I'm not real sure, but if we have to haul natural gas, wouldn't it be smarter to do it on a rail? Thanks.
Mhm. Okay. You have some parting comments, sir, since we gave you some homework to do?
Oh, just like showing up at a staff meeting at the railroad is what it is. A couple of comments. Yes, to Representative McCabe's question about liquefied natural gas, we were the first railroad in the nation to receive authority from the regulator to move LNG in ISO containers on flat cars. That authorization has lapsed since then, and we are in the process of trying to get that reapproved by the FRA, but it has been challenging to say the least on that. With regard to the $20 million that Representative McCabe referenced there, I don't know what the dollars. I'm not sure what we're talking about here, I guess, is my point on this. The railroad had specifically paid contractors to do the work, and there were certainly indirect cost charges or indirect charges as are any entity that handles pass-throughs like this, but we'll run that to ground and certainly get back to you, Representative McCabe, on that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Parting comments from the assembly, questions to anybody here? Any input you want to give? Yeah, Ron, did you, yeah? Oh, yes, Assemblyperson 2, go ahead.
I'd like to thank everybody for showing up and having this discussion, because it's been a kind of a heated discussion, whether or not we build a road or do we do a rail. Like comments were made, like, you know, you're a genius if you make the right call and it all goes well, and then you're a turnip if you make the call and it don't go well. So I appreciate all the conversation. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ron, go ahead.
I wanted to thank everyone for coming out and having this discussion. I wanted to thank the Lord and Savior for all the blessings that he gives us. May he grant us wisdom for our leaders, patience for our parents to teach your word, willingness and an open heart for our children. Will you please bless the poor, the addicted, the hurting, the less fortunate. Please bless our state, our military, help those guys. Thank you for our veterans, Lord. We just ask and pray that you guide us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Assemblyperson Fonoff, do you have any parting comments or questions or comments?
The little comment that the whole time I was thinking before Senator Shower asked is there an option for future so that we're not like limited to one to another? And I guess I'll probably talk a little more to Mike about that because we don't know what the width and everything like that. But that was the only thing is instead of debating one on another, I was thinking, how is that is it possible that we can start on one and then still leave the door for the other? That was just my way of thinking, but I'm thankful for everybody who came and put an input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. From the invited guests, any parting comments before we move on to our resolution? Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't realize who you were when I was going through, so please accept my apologies.
Oh, thanks, Madam Mayor. Catherine Keith, I'm Deputy Commissioner, Department of Transportation. And it was a great opportunity to come out and just listen to such a longstanding project. And when things like this have been going on over 15 years, you don't want to be the one to open your mouth and offer any comments. So one thing I can say is just that I do applaud the Assembly. The Department of Transportation, we did support the borough in their submission to the rural just multimodal project discretionary grant. And so if the Assembly does decide to move forward with the grant, with this project as a road, then the department's here to support those decisions. And overall, as an organization, what we're finding is just need to be agile with the decisions that we're making, just because there's so many external factors that are constantly redirecting our course of action. And that's difficult when we have projects such as this that require years of planning. And so it's hard to shift midstream. So it's just admirable that you're willing to have this conversation to look at, what is an option that you have. Maybe there's more options that just haven't been considered, and taking that step back can be a really empowering thing and help you make decisions that are really best suited for the borough and the state. So we're here to support that. And as most of you likely know, our draft STIP did close for public comment September 3rd. If there are any outstanding questions or comments about the projects in that, if there's key safety projects that weren't included, please reach out and let us know. And we'll be working with our federal partners to get that approved and get funding moving as quickly as possible. So thank you. Happy to answer any further questions.
Okay. Yes. Governor's office, Todd, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Assembly. And I think just from the governor's perspective, he would want to thank you for kind of bringing everybody together for the conversation. It is going to be an ongoing conversation between the borough and their delegation. The governor will continue to have conversations with Commissioner Anderson and DOT, as well as the Mat-Su delegation and the Mat-Su Borough Assembly and manager. So just thank you for the conversation. And I know that there will be many more to come, and also with the railroad. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions for the governor's office. John Springsteen works with the railroad and on infrastructure, and also I know Manager Brown has met Shireen, who works on infrastructure, and then I'm always available too for questions or comments if you have any. So thank you.
Thank you. Ready. So before I go to the next item on the agenda, any other comments on this subject? Okay, alrighty. So the next item on our agenda is Resolution 23-095.
A resolution extending the September 12, 2023 local disaster emergency declaration to October 31st, 2023 for the Talkeetna revetment flooding.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to invite Tom Adams as he moves to the podium. We did make a disaster declaration for the Talkeetna revetment. There has been flooding, high waters, erosion occurring for the past week or so. We made that declaration, the mayor and I, this morning, which buys us 7 days. So the resolution that's before you essentially would extend that through October 31st and give us the authorities we need to go and render some temporary repairs. I think there's a longer term solution in play here, but it's going to take some time to develop that. So I asked Tom to provide a quick update. I know we're pressed for time, but I also wanted to create an opportunity for the assembly to ask any questions of Tom if you have specific concerns or items that you would like additional detail on. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Tom Adams.
Tom, before you start, the clerk has reminded me I do not have a motion on the floor, so I need to get a motion from the assembly first before we can continue discussion. Thank you. Go ahead.
I move to adopt Resolution 23-095.
Okay, so we'll have a staff report. There we go, sir.
Madam Mayor, Manager, Members of Assembly. So Tom Adams, Public Works Director. As the manager suggested, he made a declaration of emergency, local emergency this morning in reaction to some of the events that have been happening in Talkeetna. Many of you are aware, towards the late end of August and going into the holiday weekend, we had quite a precipitous event across the valley. We had a number of roadways overtopping with flooding due to some of our rivers. Most importantly for this conversation is the community of Talkeetna. Beginning, like I said, the holiday weekend, we have an overtopping of the dike in the revetment that caused localized flooding in Talkeetna. We had depths of water that required response from our O&M division and our Department of Emergency Services to monitor the events in there. As the waters receded on the back end of the holiday, sometime in the Tuesday afternoon timeframe, our roadways were no longer overtopped. It allowed our pre-design engineering group, our civil engineers, to make site visits and assessments of the dikes and the revetments in the area. On Tuesday evening, one of my civil engineers physically conducted an assessment of the revetments at the end of Main Street and observed that we had lost approximately 150 feet of the revetment itself. He brought back that discussion with our Public Works department, myself, and the remaining part of the division on Wednesday, and we started and implement our emergency response plan. Thursday morning, we got a call from our local fire chief in the community of Talkeetna who reported that we had lost approximately 60 to 85 feet of land itself, not just revetment, but land inbound from the river, and was starting to jeopardize some cabins that were in between Main Street and First Street. Obviously that started to turn a little bit more urgency to our reaction. We conducted another site on Thursday. I physically went out to Talkeetna on Thursday myself with a representative from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. At that time, we measured out that we had lost over 300 feet of revetment, and again, observed the fact that the land itself had started to erode into the Talkeetna and Susitna rivers there. So what did that mean for us? So talking with the manager, we started to implement our emergency response plan. We do have a written plan that was developed in 2020. This is not a unique event for the community of Talkeetna. Obviously we have a dike there for a purpose. We have a revetment there that's actually undergone repair several times in the past 10 years or so, most recently in 2020. So we do have a plan to deal with this. Now, dealing with a loss of over 300 feet of revetment is new. Typically, it's on a much smaller magnitude, and we have not lost as much land in as short amount of time as we have this past few days. So starting over the weekend, we actually engaged a contractor and procured 900 tons of class 4 riprap that we mobilized to the community to pre-stage in reaction to the event. That material's on site now. It's not nearly enough. We're anticipating we're somewhere about 30% of the material that we might need. And I say might because some of the variables that we do not have answers to right now include the depth of the water and adjacent to the riverbank. As you can imagine, the water, while receding, is still flowing quite heavily. And we just aren't unable to right now to obtain the depth of the river there, which is a pretty significant variable with respect to the volume of riprap we need to place in the water. We do look in near future our river forecast, our gauges are showing that the river is receding. The water levels are going down, probably not near as quick as we'd like to. The weather forecast does not show any, significant precipitous event in the next 10 days, although there is some rain, but we're not talking anything more than about a quarter to half an inch. We are, like I said, implementing an emergency plan to, and this is part of the manager and the mayor's declaration, to procure more materials and give us more latitude in that respect, to stage more materials on site and to actually start to react and rebuild our revetment. Again, in concert with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, our reaction right now is more about protecting the riverbank from further erosion. We have highly silty sand material out there, and it's very erosive even under a low flow condition. We're still somewhat under a high flow condition. So even on Thursday, while on site, we lost somewhere on the order of 5 to 10 feet more of riverbank in that area. So the concern is that as this riverbank continues to erode, that we're susceptible to losing more of our revetment as it moves downstream, and not only jeopardizing the cabins that are there now, that are within about 20 to 30 feet of the riverbank, but there are facilities further downstream that could be exposed if that revetment were to start eroding further downstream. So as with anything, the question I ask is, what are you going to do and when are you going to do it? So, I mean, the what are you going to do is starting to take shape. Is the when is kind of there's a little bit of gambling going on, because the more that the river recedes, the better opportunity we have to do a more effective job. The gambling part is really looking out ahead and seeing, how is the river going to react? It's not just about precipitation. The Susitna River moves channels quite frequently. In this case, right now, it's chosen to be on the east side of the riverbed. So, I think right now our forecast is we're looking to do this work within the next 2 or 3 weeks. We have some procurement to do to obtain some more material. Like I said, we have some favorable forecasts to look forward to, but we're looking to actually start physically placing rock more towards the end of this month and beginning of October, as long as the water continues to recede. And, the facts are we still have to procure about another 2,000 tons of riprap material in any event. So with that being said, I'd be happy to answer any specific questions you have with respect to our response.
Any questions from the assembly?
So
Yes, go ahead, Ron.
we're looking at approximately 2,700 tons of riprap then to bring it back to the existing stage that we had before.
So through the mayor, Assembly Member Bernier, yes, our preliminary estimates kind of have a wide range, and it really depends on the depth, because you can imagine, the slope of the rocks as you need to rebuild the revetment is contingent on depth. So we're on the lower bound range of about another 2,700 tons of material, but that could move upwards to north of 6,000, maybe 7,000 tons of riprap.
Thank you.
Okay. Ready? No other comments? Then no other discussion? Is there any objection to approving Resolution 23-095? Okay. Seeing and hearing none, then Resolution 23-095 has been approved. Does any of the assembly have any further comments? Okay, if not, then this meeting is adjourned. And again, thanks everybody for coming, both the public as well as our invited guests. And as somebody said, I'm sure there will be more, but we appreciate everybody caring about the Mat-Su Borough. So with that, the meeting will adjourn at 4:35 or 5:35, excuse me.